Hi, I'm Sunya, and I'm the host of the Creatrix Connection podcast. Thank you for joining me on this journey to explore what it means to be a woman, a mother, and a creative soul. For many years, I've spun my wheels as a freelancer and creative entrepreneur. Since I was a kid, it was always my dream, but I completely lost myself somewhere along the way until I got to a point where it felt like I was creating, even sometimes living for everyone but myself. I became uninspired and disconnected from my purpose, and that's where my journey with soul work started, and my search for the goddess. Since then, I've been unraveling the shadow stories I was telling myself, often rooted in shame, passed down through advertising, culture, family beliefs, religion. The goddess was nowhere to be seen in these realms. So where was she? Well, it turns out she was within me all along, in my stillness, my poetry, my art, my movement, my sacred cycles. She was in my very being. It was then that I realized my purpose is that I'm here to remember her in each moment, embody her more every day, and tell her story. The goddess, the creatrix, has been silenced for too long. Now it is time to listen and share her wisdoms and teachings experienced through my life and the lives of creative women everywhere. We are doing this through the Creatrix Connection. So, thank you again for joining me on this journey as we explore her story. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Creatrix Connection podcast. I'm Sunya, your host, and I'm here again with Kendra. Kendra is an astrologer with over 40 years experience, in addition to being a lifelong student of the archetypes and goddesses and the mythology that is interwoven through all of that. So, welcome back, Kendra.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, and Kendra and I are both so passionate about these stories and the meanings and how they weave into our own lives. And so for this episode today, we decided to touch upon the myth of Innana. I chose this myth because she's truly the first shero of our culture, of our time that we know about. It's the oldest written myth, approximately 2300 BCE, and she's known for the story of going into the depths, into the underworld, to bring back knowledge, experience, to see another side of herself that she had not known before, and to make herself vulnerable. And so I feel that this aligns with what we do together in soul work, and it aligns with our own journeys as women as we reflect and move through our own lives and go into the depths of our being. This myth came from the Sumerian culture. It was a pre-patriarchal culture, and although there's a lot about this culture we don't know, it did appear to be a matriarchal type culture where men and women were valued equally, and women held powerful positions, and the goddess was revered. So within this mythology, Innana was referred to as the Queen of Heaven and had a clear association with Venus and the cycles of Venus. She developed many names, including Ishtar.
Yes, that's a later name. Astarte.
Astarte.
Right.
And all associated with Venus. And she had a full spectrum of characteristics. She wasn't just a one-dimensional character. She was the goddess of love and war. I sense the fullness of nature's powers the lightning and the thunder and the river and the stillness. There's a little bit of all of these elements that are seen in nature within her character.
And the other dimension of her in this particular story, where she makes this descent to the underworld, is she is in the quest for wisdom that she's bringing back to her own culture.
Yes.
And so I think that this is from a time where there wasn't that separation between being wise and being sexual. Because the opening line of the myth is that she's leaning against the great tree of life, admiring her wondrous vulva, or something along those lines. But there's a clear, open sexual dimension to her beingness, and it's not separated from her being a very wise goddess who wants to attain more wisdom.
I love that. And the connection between our wombs and our sexuality and our creativity and the power behind that, which in many ways we've kind of lost. We've forgotten, and so now we're reclaiming that wisdom and reclaiming our sexuality and our creativity and our wombs as a source of wisdom and a source of intuition. So in regards to the cycle of Venus, I know that we had discussed earlier about the 40 days and 40 nights.
Yes, one of the things that's a very familiar cycle for anybody who's read the Bible. 40 days and 40 nights, that's when Jesus is said to disappear into the desert and gain the wisdom of that religion. But 40 is a number that's in a lot of stories, and it refers specifically to the number of days that Venus, the planet in the sky, metaphorically disappears into the underworld. We can't see her. We see her as an evening star for a while, then we don't see her at all, and then 40 days later she reappears as a morning star. So that number 40 has a great connection with disappearance into another realm, you could say, and a retrieval or a regaining of something in ourselves, a kind of wisdom that maybe you can't know when you're just dancing through your everyday life.
Yeah.
And in the ordinary consciousness of life, you have to take that time for pause and reflect and go inward, which is what your work is so much about.
Yeah.
How to do that.
Exactly. Yes. And there's so many cycles to bring into our consciousness, not just the moon cycles, but also Venus's cycles are very interesting and a topic I'd love to go more in depth upon another time. So now let's get started on this myth. The myth of Innana. She started as a queen of heaven, and she is called to go visit her recently widowed sister, the Queen of the Dead. And so she gets dressed in her finest clothes, puts on the beautiful lapis jewelry, a crown of heaven, a golden breastplate. She has her scepter, and following alongside her is her assistant. What's her assistant's name?
Ninshubar.
Yeah.
She doesn't really go with her so much as Inanna tells her, hey, I'm going on this journey. So, pay attention. Like, if I don't come back,
Okay.
do something.
Maybe she walks her out of her
Out of the
home.
palace.
Yeah. And as she leaves, she kind of bids her farewell and says, hey,
And another thing that Inanna's carrying that I love paying attention to, she's carrying her lapis measuring rod. This is very important because it tells you, that she's very smart. Because if you'd have to know how to, do these measurements of the stars and the earth and, when the right time is for ceremony and, a whole lot of stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's an important feature of her regalia.
Yes. So she's prepared. She's not only beautiful.
Well, she thinks she's prepared anyway. She's the queen of heaven, and she pretty much thinks she could go anywhere and do anything.
Right? Well, don't we all have that experience where, we just sense, okay, I'm about to do something that I'm not really sure where it's going to go. What do I need to do? I need I definitely need to bring this one thing. And then you're like, okay, I know I'm going to use this. And then that's like the first thing you lose, the first thing that breaks. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't even turn back now. Like,
Right.
what's going
Because you're on the journey.
My laugh is measuring rod. Like, oh, what's going to happen now? Okay. So she arrives at the gates. And there is a gatekeeper, of course, who reminds her upon her request to enter that no one returns from the underworld. And she insists, I want to go and see my sister. So the gatekeeper says, well, let me go and talk to your sister, and I'll be right back. And so her sister's name is
Ereshkigal.
The gatekeeper goes down and informs Ereshkigal that she's there. And she says, well, I'm not interested in her presence here. She can leave. And she's very upset. And so they decide to bolt all 7 gates and only let her in 1 gate at a time. And during this process, she's required to remove 1 garment or 1 item at each gate. And so at the first gate, she protests this, of course. And what is she told?
Oh, she's told by these gatekeepers the ways of the underworld are perfect in every way.
Do not question them.
Do not question them, right? That's a good element there.
Yes.
This is how it goes. You've got to do what we say.
You have to trust in the unknown. You have to surrender. So the wisdom of the goddess is already, we're immersed in it. So as she moves through each gate, she takes off her crown. She takes off her lapis jewelry. She removes her clothes until she is left with nothing. And by the time she enters the throne room, she is completely naked and bowed low. And Ereshkigal is there alongside the judges of the underworld.
Another potent image at that point in the story is she fixes the eye of death upon her. And that's presumably what kills her. And I just always think of that as it's that moment when you're confronted with a really stark truth about yourself or about a situation, and all of your old illusions just have to go. You're just in that moment and you've got to see this thing that you didn't really see before.
Yeah, it's that transformative process underway.
Underway, right.
So the judges of the underworld surround her and pass judgment against her. As the eye of death is fastened upon her and she is struck with it, Innana is turned into a corpse and hung upon a hook.
Yeah, and it's described, I think, to the best I can understand it, as kind of a peg. And any images in mythology that are pegs and poles are often, it's a shamanic imagery there. The pole of eternity, the place of, immense stillness where nothing is happening, but everything is revolving and turning around it. So it's that complete stopping point where apparently everything's stopped, but it isn't actually
Perceived to be,
right. Our ego consciousness says, oh my God, I'm depressed, nothing's happening, or whatever. I've lost my lover, my job, my whatever we're attached to. And then you have that moment of like nothing's going on, it's all lost. But of course that's not really the whole story.
Yeah, and also, in relation to some of the shamanic mythologies or processes, right, where there's a sense of like dismemberment or losing of your identity.
Yes.
That is certainly happening. Her identity with her body is being, in some ways, separated, right? She turns into a corpse. She becomes a body without a spirit inside of it.
Yeah, doesn't really matter down here that she's ruling her big queendom up above.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant.
Yes. And so the person that she is gone, is dead. And there's another interesting element that you mentioned before when we spoke of this, was that Ereshkigal, the Queen of the Dead, is experiencing labor pains, and she's sitting on a birth couch.
Yeah, this is a very striking image to me, because that, simultaneously we have the Inanna as the corpse in the image of death. Ereshkigal, her sister, is on a birth couch. And it seems like a completely paradoxical image in the underworld.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a simultaneous image. It just goes right immediately from the meat hook or the peg into this. Ereshkigal's on the birth couch moaning, and what happens next that transforms the whole story is these two little creatures show up, and these creatures have been sent from the upper world, and this goes back to the part where she has told her trusty servant, who is also like an advisor, or we can think of it in modern day terms as a good friend, or a therapist or coach, or somebody who's a witness to our journey. Mm-hmm. And Ninchubar is her name, and she goes to a couple of different gods. One turns her down, and she goes to another one. So, come on, you got to help me get Innana out of the underworld. And there's two little beings that are fashioned, and they're neither male nor female. And one brings the waters of life, and one brings the the earth. Mm. So the earth and the water and the ability to create new life. So they go down there, and when she's moaning, "Oh, my insides," because she's in pain, they just empathize. They go, "Oh, my insides." And Ereshkigal goes, "Oh, my outsides," and they go, "Oh, my outsides." So suddenly she notices them, because someone is actually listening to her. This voice in the dark from this exiled sister that...
She's experiencing so much pain. From what I understand, in previous mythology, she had lost her husband.
Yes, that's a part we kind of danced over there a little bit. That's the reason, given in many of these stories, that Inanna goes to the underworld in the first place, because she wants to pay her respects to her sister's dead husband. Mm. So this knowledge that these goddesses have in the upper world of something going on in the underworld, that's a common theme in other cultures as well.
Mm. So if I understand correctly, these two beings that are sympathizing with Ereshkigal, they are the ones that came to liberate Innana, right? To come get her.
Yes.
And so...
because when she hears them, she says, "Well, let me give you a gift. I'll give you whatever you want." She names a bunch of things that, and they say, no, we don't want that. All we want is for you to restore Innana to life.
Yes. And they have the tools to help her on that process. And so she says, okay. But as they take Innana and they are ascending back into the upper world, they are told that someone has to take her place.
Correct.
Yes. And so as she comes back into the world, she sees that all of her closest relatives are mourning her loss. She's been gone. They assume she's going to be gone forever. She went to the underworld. She gets back to their palace, and her husband's there, living his best life, drinking and eating, and another day in the palace. And she obviously doesn't take that very well.
No, she doesn't take that well at all.
And so
and he pays the price.
Yeah, she was like, well, I know who's going to take my place. And so she sends him to the underworld to take her place. And so through this process, they share half the year, correct? She has gone to the underworld for part of the year, and then he takes the second half. And that creates the turns of the season.
Yeah, that's a common motif in these goddess mythologies. And what you might want to pull out of here that's interesting is it's the goddess who's the steady force, which we now, associate with the masculine. The sun, the light, that which is steady, and then, women are all mysterious, and they're only like about the moon. So it's not to give up any dimension of your being, but it's interesting to see that, it's a role reversal here.
Yeah.
It's the God that comes and goes, lives and dies, and is sacrificed every year. And, one thing about the ancient deities is if you go back far enough, they're pretty adept at changing sexes. So I think, personally, what we can take out of this is, you don't have to be so tied to these rigid definitions of masculine and feminine. And, that's where we are now, is we're in an evolving place, reclaiming different dimensions of these things and redefining ourselves.
In relation to the cycles of the seasons, you're saying, and that's kind of how she isn't necessarily just dominated by the moon.
Right.
She also has the solar elements as well.
Yes, there are many, many sun goddesses. And as we move through the year of the zodiac signs, you have other goddesses that are going to reflect more of those type of stories.
Okay. Wow. So that is, in summary, the story of Inanna. And I just love how this reflects our journey of integrating wholeness into our lives, and how that journey must require vulnerability and shedding our former self and rebirth as a fully aware individual.
One of the elements of that myth, too, is that she is in search of what they call the May, which were all the gifts of civilization. So on a personal level, I think you could think about it as like, what makes you wiser in your life? And in order to get there, you usually have to give up some other part of yourself that was operating before, but it's not relevant anymore. So that, she's on a quest to know more and have more healing gifts to bring back to her world.
And ultimately, it speaks to me as how do our challenges become sources of our greatest insights and our greatest successes? Still choosing to take responsibility so that we can reclaim our own story and rewrite it. And that's why I believe these myths are so powerful. Okay, well, that is the myth of Inanna. So thank you so much, Kendra, for helping me tell that story.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And for you all listening at home, I hope that this inspires you as you move through into this new cycle of fall and transitioning into the winter time, into the stillness, and especially as we enter into Samhain, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, this has been the Creatrix Connection podcast, and I look forward to connecting with you all again next week.